Okay, so I thought I would start today's discussion of the reading group by talking about just briefly this video that Fred Conference Report has just posted called Long Dark Night of the Soul. And it's a discussion of altruistic selfishness and self-awareness. It's a response video, but it also brings up the issue of original sin. And interestingly, it traces it back through a kind of genetic lineage of the fact that every person alive is someone who was passed on the survival value genes by the mere fact that that person lived long enough to produce the line that was continuous. So the people who are alive today are basically continuous with those who survived enough to reproduce. Now, I bring this up and want to set this as the context for the reading group over the next month, or I guess the next 3 months, because we are going to be looking at three different books by Ernest Becker. First, we're going to look at the second edition of The Birth and Death of Meaning, then we're going to look at Denial of Death, and then finally we're going to look at Escape from Evil. People who don't yet have those readings, please go get a copy, get your library to get a copy. I can see what I can do to make some of those available. If people want to contact me, I'll see, what I could do to help people, pass them around amongst each other or something. At any rate, I think the real interesting issue in development, before I get into any particular book by Becker, I want to do this introductory video on Becker and talk a little bit about the trajectory from these three books. Now, these all three are part of the mature trilogy of Becker. It was roughly, this the final, again, this sort of called the trilogy of Becker's work, where in The Birth and Death of Meaning, he's doing something sort of like Fred is doing here, right? That he begins with this problem of self-esteem, and he is convinced that self-esteem is the root of human motive, and he advocates a kind of psychoanalytic characterology. He's going to suggest that Freud was right in the sense that people are driven by motives of which they're unaware, but Freud was wrong in that he thought it was sexuality. For Becker, it's the need for self-worth and self-esteem. We're animals who have organismal anxiety with regard to our relevance to the world, and we need to feel as if we're objects of ultimate value and worth in order to act. And he really did, he saw the creation of standardized roles and cultural forms to be for the sustained and continued maintenance of self-worth. And he did. He saw this to be the great discovery of psychology, sociology, and anthropology in the 20th century, found it to be an amazing, amazing phenomena. By the time he gets to Denial of Death, and here he's been diagnosed, I guess with cancer, he's close to dying. And or maybe not yet, but he is dealing more and more with death. He starts to smell something rotten in the yearning for self-esteem. He starts to see that the bid for self-esteem will know no limits, and it ultimately culminates into a desire for immortality, and that the organism, unable to handle its own limitations, its own finitude, its own boundedness. And he doesn't just mean the fact that we're going to die, it's what he calls going the way of the grasshopper, nameless, faceless, meaningless death. The fact that none of this really has any meaning at all, right? This Denial of Death wins the Pulitzer Prize. He calls humans angels with anuses. So much of it is a struggle with Kierkegaard's work, and it is Becker seeing how self-esteem grows all the way into a yearning for immortality, for ultimate, a bid for ultimate relevance and ultimate truth that is an ultimate denial of the human state of affairs. And he comes to see it as just this tragic thing. Now, he is literally dying of stomach cancer while he's finishing Escape from Evil. His diagnosis becomes very grim. He sees humanity to not be on a good path, but he re-changes his entire focus. he starts to realize that he had just been following one tiny little thread and comes now to what he sees as the centerpiece of his theory. Now, what's interesting is that this book was published, Escape from Evil. It was published posthumously against his wishes. His wife Marie published it anyway. She thought that it was too important that people would really want to see it. I think it is so essential. It's such a crucial book to understand the development of Becker's thought. Now, it also very nicely here is doing something very similar to what Fred's little response video does here, which is it traces what we experience today back to its roots. And so we find Becker in Escape from Evil realizing, right, he starts to look at primitive, quotes primitive or oral or ancient societies, and he starts to discover that what he had been calling just the need for self-esteem was actually a twin phenomena that was being addressed in ancient societies, and that modern societies slowly eroded that other leg sort of from the picture. It's as if we're standing on one leg, the leg of the need for self-worth or value. What Becker came to discover was what he termed a theory of, or an account of, natural guilt. The notion here is that humans are guilty. See, now guilt isn't a very popular word. People, oh geez, I don't want to hear. They don't want to hear more about guilt. They think guilt is just it's outdated. People feel bad about it, and it's not fashionable. But the guilt that he was talking about was not a personal wrongdoing. It's more the species inheritance of a being who could be aware of the gift character of existence. That's right. All of life is a kind of gift. And the ancients were aware of this. They were very aware of it. And so what they had provided were rituals by which people could heroically enact the circulation of the gift. They could go out and achieve great things and then give that to other people. And they would, in doing that, recognize the true state of affairs for the human, which is quite a humble lot in that everything around you was a gift. And you want to think in terms of abundance and scarcity and how nature's capricious, whimsical, moment by moment changes could radically affect people. Well, what Becker starts to see is that people move toward more and more of the heroic side, and they start to engage in what he calls the causa sui project, the project of trying to be of one's own cause. Humans, instead of addressing their guilt directly by rituals of expiation, by rituals of gift giving, they instead try to hide from natural guilt, covet over in a huge parade of self-sufficiency. So much that today we now think that people have simply a need to have self-worth and value, whereas for Becker, he would say, no, all of the worth and value will never do it if the person doesn't feel as if they've adequately expiated the guilt of being human. They need to feel that as if in some way they have given back to the mystery, because at some level they know that all of life is a gift. Now, for Becker, I think the way to really understand some of this development is to try to understand the inheritance structure and the relations of private property. The rough argument was that around 2,000 years ago, the accumulated guilt was so bad, it was so significant that many people couldn't tolerate it. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't make amends for all the accumulated wealth, the distribution of wealth, and it was very apparent that some people were living wonderful lives while other people were, living just horrible lives. And they needed some way to make amends for it. And at this point in history, they thought only a supernatural God could make amends for it. And the Jesus myth sort of emerges out of this. That the Jesus myth is an attempt to believe that someone else can expiate our guilt. The human guilt, natural guilt, again, it's not a thing you shake a finger at. It's something that you try to recognize as your own conscious self-awareness, coming to terms with the gift character of life and realizing that much of your yearning for self-worth, for self-esteem, is actually only part of it. It's equally an attempt to contribute back to the world's resources, to recirculate its beauty and harmony, and to recognize the gift character. Okay, thanks. Hope that's a good start. Contact me, people.